Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Wonders 2. And today I'm going to be speaking about caste discrimination around the world. My name's Rick Gold, and if you don't know me, I've been the chair of the curriculum committee for ILR for about 3 years, and I'm leaving that position and moving to the head of the humanities subcommittee. So I'll be doing pretty much the same thing, but we have both a subcommittee working on humanities and social sciences, and then another one on physical sciences. So I'll be continuing on. Caste is an issue that, sort of people glaze over. They know about the word untouchables, and they know that there's a sort of hierarchy of castes, and particularly in South Asia, and that it's been around for thousands of years. But I wanted to share the fact that as an American Jew, I was very interested in this issue because Jews too have been oppressed for millennia, and I felt that there was a certain amount of solidarity. So for the last 10 years, I've been working with an organization called the International Commission on Dalit Rights. And Dalit is the word that many people use for untouchables. And so I've been doing that. It's a Nepali American organization and has been organizing to support the rights of Dalits in the US and in South Asia. And next, let's see if we can do the next one. Could you start by moving to the next slide? Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what is the caste system, how the caste discrimination affects Dalits or untouchables, and how it affects them in other South Asians. We're going to look at the legal regulations of caste discrimination, particularly in India, but also across South Asia. And then we're going to look at how caste discrimination affects countries outside South Asia. And finally, we're going to look on caste discrimination in the US. Next slide, please. Let's see if we can do it. Great. So what is the caste system? First of all, many people think of it as a Hindu phenomenon, and it definitely is an outgrowth of the Hindu religion, but now it is particularly more looked at as more of a social discrimination that affects people regardless of their religion. And I'll go over that in a little while. It's a framework to govern society, and it is just part of one second. It is just part of the overall way that society was organized hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, focusing on cultural, economic, religious, spiritual, and practical, and political. And the way the caste system was set up was to assign rights to each of different castes. And there were generally 4 castes, and each of them had different rights. Some of them were more powerful than others, and particularly outside of the caste system were considered the untouchables, or what we now call the Dalits. And caste was maintained particularly by requiring that marriage take place only within the caste. And the word that we use for that today is endogamy. And so there was a lot of endogamy among castes, and there was prohibition on intercaste marriage. The bottom caste, as I've said, the untouchables, were considered impure and polluting, and therefore there had to be ways to keep them apart from the other castes, and so they were not allowed to have property. They were not given education. They had no civil rights, and their purpose mainly was to serve the people of higher caste. And as a result, the Dalits, as we call them, were isolated and segregated from the rest of society. Now, this, of course, has changed over the millennia, and I'll go into that, how it is a bit today. But it's important to know that there are different ways of describing caste. One of the important ways is called the Varna, or the Varna system, and it's a hierarchical order of 4 classes of ancient India, and outside of them are the Dalits or untouchables. So there's like the Brahmins and the warriors and the artisans, etc. So each of them is often considered to be the part of the caste system. But another way of looking at the caste system is what we call birth groups or jati, and there are hundreds of them, and it really varies from place to place, but they are endogamous and hierarchical as well. And finally, among South Asian Muslims, there's another form of hierarchy, and that's called the Baradari, and it is focusing particularly on brotherhood or clans. Okay. So I've given you an understanding of what caste is, and I wanted to go over particularly how the United Nations is dealing with caste. And it's taken a while, but they've finally come to a general understanding of how caste relates to other forms of social discrimination. The first effort was in 1969, which was the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And they defined racial discrimination as any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose of or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. Now, that's a definition that only UN could do, but the important word among this is that racial discrimination includes the concept of descent, or where your family comes from. And so this was explored later in 2009 in the Principles for Addressing Discrimination Based on Work and Descent. And they defined descent as any distinction, exclusion, restrictions, or preference based on inherited status, such as caste, including present or ancestral occupation, family, and emphasize the typical association of discrimination on work and development with untouchability and the notions of purity and pollution. So what they did was they further clarified that racism includes a discrimination on the basis of descent, and that descent includes discrimination on the basis of caste. And then finally, in 2016, there was a UN report on the caste-based discrimination from a minorities perspective, and it said, caste-affected groups, although they may belong to the same larger ethnic, religious, or linguistic community, shared minority-like characteristics, particularly their non-dominant and often marginalized position, stigma, and the historic use of the minority rights framework to claim their rights. But this report was never really finalized because the Indian government has been opposing it. And particularly, it's concerned about its reputation as a country. It's concerned about the potential for focus on caste to tarnish the Hindu religion, and particularly these days with its focus on promoting Hindu nationalism. It really doesn't want a discussion about caste to take place. So that's where we are. It's important to recognize from the UN's perspective that racial discrimination is a global term which encompasses discrimination on work and descent, and that type of discrimination is an umbrella, for caste discrimination. So that's where the UN comes from. Okay, let's see if I can move to the next one. Great. So I want to go over the modern history of the caste system. And so the caste system, as I kind of indicated, is a very dynamic system. Even though people are frozen into their place, it actually has changed over the years, depending upon where you are in the system. And the British, when they came in as colonizers, they tried to use the caste system in a way that enabled them to govern and to administer their policies. And so for that reason that they chose the Varna, as I spoke about, the 4 different castes with the untouchables or Dalits outside of it, they chose that as a way of describing caste when it comes from many different perspectives. So they found the right religious text, and then they decided that they would use the Varna as a way of determining how to describe caste. So in terms of the 20th century, in 1932, the British recommended that the Dalits would have their own seats in the parliament. And this created a lot of controversy. Gandhi, who is father of the Indian nation, was opposed to this. He didn't want to emphasize caste as part of the Indian background, and if it was to be dealt with, he felt that it should be dealt with within Hinduism rather than from a political perspective. And so he was very close with one of the most educated and important Dalit leaders, B.R. Ambedkar. And Ambedkar supported the efforts to have a separate electorate for the Dalits. And there was quite a bit of controversy, and it resulted in what's called the Pune Pact. Pune Pact is a very famous in Indian history, and it reserved increased numbers of seats for the Dalits in the parliament. So as India moved towards independence, this type of conflict was played out in public between Gandhi and Ambedkar. But Gandhi recognized that Ambedkar was so well educated and such a statesman that he selected Ambedkar to draft the Indian Constitution, which was passed in 1950. And it was very remarkable because through the efforts of Ambedkar, the Constitution abolished untouchability and included safeguards for minorities. So not only the Dalits, but also tribal Indians were also protected in many ways. And I'll go over that later. So beyond the Constitution, India passed some laws that affected the caste system. It guaranteed civil rights and criminalized human rights abuses for Dalits, tribals, and other disadvantaged groups. In addition, what's quite notable is the Indian government has enacted affirmative action policies, such as quotas for parliament, for public employment, for education, and that has been quite significant. So as I noted earlier, that the caste system is not restricted to the Hindu religion, that in the feeling of the stigma associated with being an untouchable was such that many people converted to other religions in hopes of no longer being an untouchable. But that wasn't the case because the caste system was actually a social discrimination rather than just being a religious discrimination. So each religion, Hinduism, the Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, all of them accepted untouchables, but nevertheless discriminated against them as well. Hinduism, as I noted, the Hindu religion requires that people of each caste intramarry, and that it's part of the religion that Dalits face discrimination, and the caste system was challenged morally within the Hindu religion and has modified, and it's less intense in terms of its rigor, particularly in the urban areas. Buddhism is the religion that many untouchables moved to, particularly under the leadership of Ambedkar. And Buddhism is egalitarian, but there still is caste discrimination. Islam also is a religion that some people of untouchable background converted to, and also it rejects caste as a religion. But in terms of the way people live, Muslims often employ the caste system to discriminate. Christianity, too, as a theology, it rejects the caste system, but many Christian Dalits are discriminated against. One reason that that caste persists across religions is that it's a social system. It's not a religious system. And that once you have the identity of a Dalit, then you can't really remove it. And particularly in the rural areas, in the villages, people live together, and whether they're one religion or another, or they've converted, it really doesn't matter. They're treated the same. Okay, now we're going to talk about how caste discrimination affects Dalits and other South Asians. So how is the caste discrimination manifested? In India, over the years, and particularly in the 21st century, there's been a substantial erosion in the institution of caste that for many people it's not relevant. For Dalits, less so, but Dalits make up like 1 of 6 Indians, and many Indians feel that caste is not relevant to them anymore, particularly in the urban areas. India is faced with a situation where there really is caste consciousness when it comes to marriage, and there's very little intercaste marriage that takes place, and those who do so are socially isolated. Dalit lives overall have improved, particularly with the affirmative action, as well as some of the laws that have been put in place to prevent what they call atrocities or hate crimes. Dalits still feel a sense of social isolation, even if they have, done well in government and education. In rural areas, Dalits are continued to be treated as impure. And one way of noting the problems that persist with the caste system is that there are severe inequalities in human development, in education, health, employment, and poverty and wealth. And Dalits continue to suffer from stigma and shame. Many of them maintain their family names, and once you know their family names, you know they're Dalits, and it makes them feel quite ashamed of where they're coming from. Okay, so India is not the only place where caste exists, and the caste system is quite important in other countries in South Asia. Nepal, which has a very large Hindu population, is strongly affected by caste. And In 2008, it moved from a monarchy to a republic, and under its new constitution, it outlawed untouchability and recognized the problem of caste discrimination and required that great focus be put on improving the lives of Dalits, which make up a large percentage of Nepal's population. But discrimination is not the same all over the country, but particularly in certain rural areas, it is quite strong. Bangladesh, which is a Muslim country, also has a problem of discrimination against of Dalits. It does have a minority Hindu population, and many of the Muslims are actually descended from Dalits, so they also face discrimination. And the government there really hasn't developed a policy of how to deal with the Dalit population. Pakistan is a almost totally Muslim country, but again, many of the Muslims are descended from Dalits, and they face discrimination in certain geographical areas. Sri Lanka is less affected by a caste discrimination, but there still is a sense of social discrimination. Now I'm going to go over how the caste discrimination affects Dalits. As I noted earlier, there's high poverty and malnutrition. There's low education, health, employment, and property ownership. Of course, this is not for all Dalits, but for a large percentage of them. There's a high dependence in the rural areas on informal labor rather than jobs, and the higher castes often refuse to patronize Dalit establishments, whether they're stores or restaurants or transport. But the Dalits have taken advantage of some laws by bringing hate crimes to the courts, and over 15 years, they brought over 250,000 cases of what's called atrocities to the courts. Next, I'll talk about how Dalits have organized to fight caste discrimination. And there have been efforts over the years, particularly since the 19th century, for Dalits to try to improve their social and economic conditions, starting with poets under the spiritual and cultural resistance, social reform movements that have focused on, what the Black community here is called uplift, education, schools, fighting the Brahmin class, and framing caste as a form of oppression rather than as an aspect of religion. Again, the leader, the strongest leader of the Dalits is B.R. Ambedkar, and you'll see right here, if you can read it, the book that he wrote called the annihilation of caste, with a reply to Mahatma Gandhi, his rival. And he was organizing in many ways to fight the caste discrimination. Some of his strategies included mass civil rights actions that, for example, allow them to, the Dalits to have access to public water, political party formation, and drafting the Constitution, as I said, and promoting what's called reservations in education, jobs, and legislature. So reservations of jobs, for example, and positions in schools and the parliament. And then he also led efforts to convert to Buddhism as a way of escaping the impact of Hinduism on the Dalits. Beyond that, there were groups that were more radical, that particularly starting in the 1970s, and that was groups. There was a group that was formed called the Dalit Panthers, which are named after pretty much the Black Panthers in this country. And they were kind of a militant group and out on the streets and getting a lot of attention. And then there were Dalits who were involved in political party organization, as well as using political parties to gain power, particularly to focus on redistribution, representation, and protection from violence. There are a lot of grassroots organizations, non-governmental organizations, and they get involved in public protests and legal advocacy and organizing various campaigns for land rights, labor rights, and enforcement of the Prevention of Atrocities Act. And finally, there's these days those who've gone to social media and have reached out to the United Nations for support. So, who are some of the famous activists and reformers? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who's over to your right with the glasses, and this is an AI-generated image, but you're left. Thanks. And so he was quite famous, particularly because of the Constitution and his efforts to put in place institutions that supported Dalit rights. There's Jyotirao Phule, who was involved in education issues concerning Dalits and community models. And then Kanchi Ram, who was mobilizing political power through political parties and trying to translate grassroots policy organizations into policy. Okay, now we'll go over the legal regulation and caste discrimination, of caste discrimination across South Asia. And we'll start by looking at the Indian Constitution. And the governing principles of the Constitution, which was passed in 1950, was social justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And as I noted, because of Ambedkar, the Constitution had a particular focus on opposing caste discrimination and also abolishing untouchability. So abolishing it meant that as a government entity, it did not recognize the concept of untouchability, pollution, and separation of castes. But it was only responsible for what the federal government could do. The Constitution called for laws and policies protecting Dalits from social injustice and exploitation. And it provided equal rights to all citizens. It assured equality before the law and equal protection. It refers to equality of opportunity in manners of public employment and no discrimination in employment or under the state. So it was a quite good document, but like all constitutions, it has to be implemented, and that's a lot of the challenge. So laws were put in place, some of them initially and then later amended or updated. The Protection of Civil Rights Act of 1979, the Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989, and each of them really had important things to say about the limitations on abuses of Dalits and also tribal members. And then the Indian government itself put in place the affirmative action policy that I spoke of earlier. They call it reservation policy. And the official term is reservation for scheduled castes, which means Dalits, and scheduled tribes, which is the tribal groups. So in Nepal, they put in place an affirmative action policy for Dalits after the 2015 Constitution. And like India, there's a separate electorate for Dalits in the House of Representatives. In other South Asian countries, such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, there's a sort of lip service. They recognize Dalits as a way of targeting social services, and they call them marginalized, but they really haven't put in place an anti-discrimination legal framework to be able to deal with some of the issues that arise. Well, how effective are these laws or policies? In India, recent data shows that violence is increasing, not declining, against Dalits. India has effectively implemented affirmative action policies for Dalits and tribals, and really there is a larger representation of Dalits in government and education than their percentage of the population. As sort of a symbol, at least, in 1997, India elected its first Dalit president, N.K. Narayan. And conditions have improved, but not totally, for Dalits in education, health, and employment. They still are way behind other parts of the population. But just to show that attitudes haven't changed that much, in 2014, a survey found that 27% of the Indian population still practices untouchability. In other words, they don't want to get anywhere near a Dalit and will shun them. Now we're going to take a look at caste discrimination outside South Asia. And one group where that shows caste discrimination is the South Asian diaspora. And the South Asian diaspora is made up of 45 million people who live outside South Asia. And most of them are from India and Pakistan. The largest groups of South Asian diaspora are in the Gulf states, the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom. In the US, there's up to 6 million South Asians, people of South Asian descent. And there have been South Asian communities in several countries that since the 19th century, particularly Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, Fiji, Mauritius. And in those countries, South Asians make up 25 to 50% of the population. In the US and the UK, there are a large number of South Asians in universities, housing, and universities, where there's a certain amount of discrimination of caste discrimination. Many families, even though they say they don't really think about caste, they go to marriage brokers in India in order to find people of the mates of the same caste. There's a number of caste-based associations that have formed. In the UK, there's discrimination against Dalits when it comes to Hindu temples, and so there have been the Dalits have set up their own temples there. Intermarriage can be dealt with violently between castes, and there still continues to be some untouchability, although many Indian Americans would deny it. In Suriname and Mauritius, for example, there are caste-based occupations, so things that only Dalits would be allowed to do, and that would be inherited within the same family. And family kinships, networks, and caste-affected social relations occur in Mauritius. In Malaysia, which has a large Hindu population, the caste is a major factor in marriages, and there's a certain amount of reticence of high caste members to deal with Dalits. And it's even a factor in politics. But there is caste, or caste-like activities, a caste-like system outside of the South Asian diaspora. And in several countries, there are hierarchical relations between different groups, different ethnic groups, One of them that is most affected is the Roma in Europe, who are harassed and looked down on and discriminated in terms of housing, education, employment, and there's severe prejudice in Europe against the Roma. They're kind of like the Dalits, really. In Japan, there's a group called the Burakumin community, and they also face discrimination based on descent and are relegated to what are considered polluting occupations. Nigeria, among the Igbo, there's a group that faces social discrimination, social exclusion. In West Africa, they're the griots, who are have one of the groups that are hereditary and looked down upon still. Somalia, there are several groups. In Mauritania, there's former slaves. They call the Haratin community. And also in Yemen, there's a group. But one government that has taken important action is the United Kingdom. And they passed an Equality Act in 2010, which protects certain characteristics from, these include age, disability, marriage, pregnancy, race, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. But it doesn't include caste, and it doesn't include descent, by the way. So when they talk about race, they includes color, nationality, national origin, and ethnic origin. And the subsequent law, the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act of 2013, required the government to explore whether caste should be made an aspect of race in the Equality Act, whether caste should be considered a protected characteristic. And for several years of study, they finally decided that they would not include caste as a protected characteristic, but they would deal with it in terms of court cases, particularly dealing with racism. Now let's turn to caste discrimination in the US. There was a survey done in 2016 by Equality Labs, a non-governmental or advocacy organization. It was 1,500 South Asian Americans, and it focused on caste in the USA. Of this, Dalits made up about 24% of the respondents. Now, many, as I noted, there are 6 million or so South Asians in the US. So this was a small percentage of them, but it was the first survey that was done of caste discrimination in the US. And it found that 1 in 4 Dalits said that they faced physical assault because of their caste. 1 in 3 Dalit students feel that they've been discriminated against during their education. 2 of 3 Dalits reported being treated unfairly in their workplace. 60% report experiencing caste-based jokes or comments. 20% of Dalits report feeling discriminated at a place of business because of their caste. And over 40% reported being rejected in a romantic partnership due to their caste. Now I want to turn to the controversy of Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, the Origin of Our Discontents, which was published in 2020. And the book was quite popular, and it expressed a feeling that the U.S. was affected by a caste system that where race was a part of which race was a part. She defined the caste system differently than the UN does. And particularly, she says that caste supersedes race, while the UN says that race supersedes caste. And these are her words. She says, caste is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits. Traits that would be neutral in the abstract, but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste, whose forebears designed it. A caste system uses rigid, often arbitrary boundaries to keep the ranked groupings apart, distinct from another and in their assigned places. So this was certainly popular. It really made some sense to many people that racism in the U.S. was part of a caste system. And Dalit scholars and caste theorists have welcomed the attention that she placed on caste, but felt that she got it wrong, and that her analogy between the US and India oversimplifies caste. It misrepresents the experience of Dalits, and that erases key structural, religious, and political dimensions of caste oppression. Finally, getting to the end, I wanted to go over some solidarity expressed between American blacks and Indian Dalits. So in 1946, B.R. Ambedkar, Dalit leader, wrote a letter to W.E.B. Du Bois, who is an extremely famous American black leader and sociologist. And Ambedkar's letter, he identified similarities with the African American experience and the Dalit experience. And he sought copies of the representations that Du Bois had made to the United Nations to recognize African Americans as an oppressed minority. And Ambedkar, Du Bois responded that he had every sympathy for the untouchables of India. Beyond that, in 1965, Martin Luther King reflected on the visit that he made to India in 1959 when he was introduced as an untouchable. And I have a recording of that, and perhaps we could play that now.
India. And one afternoon I went down to speak in the southern part of India in a school that was attended by and large by young boys and girls who were the children of former untouchables. And I remember that afternoon that the principal got up to introduce me. And as he came to the end of his introduction, he said, "I would like to present to you a fellow untouchable from the United States of America." And for the moment I was peeved, I was shocked that I would be introduced as an untouchable. Pretty soon my mind ran back across to America. And I started thinking about the fact that there were so many places that I couldn't go because of the color of my skin. I started thinking about the fact that my 20 million brothers and sisters in the Negro community of America, still at the bottom of the economic ladder, deprived of adequate housing conditions, unable to live in numerous neighborhoods because of the color of their skin. I started thinking about the fact that my little children were still judged on the basis of the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. And I had to say to myself, I am an untouchable, and every Negro in the United States is an untouchable. Segregation is evil and sinful because it stigmatizes the segregated as an untouchable in a caste system. And this is why I'm convinced that we have a moral edict, a moral mandate to work to get rid of this unjust and evil system. And we must make it clear all over America that we are through with segregation now, henceforth, and forevermore, if the American dream is to be a reality.
Hope you noticed that he talked about the caste system in the U.S. Finally, I wanted to go over some of the activities that the Dalit Rights Organization organizations have done in the U.S. And you can see me there with a bullhorn with the Dalit community at a rally at the U.S. Capitol. Over the last 10 years or so, there have been several resolutions that have been passed that are support solidarity with Dalits and oppose caste discrimination. At the U.S. Congress, didn't go very far, but at least it was introduced. In California, state of California, which was vetoed by the governor, and in many universities and cities. Seattle passed a resolution that protected its citizens against caste discrimination. Beyond that, there have been court cases. The one that comes to mind, many people's mind, is the Cisco case, and where there was discrimination in employment. And there are others that focused on temple employment, use of temples, trafficking of employees, and recruitment of workers from India and employing them in slave-like conditions. Beyond that, I was particularly involved in a U.S. government listening session where the Equal Opportunity, EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, Department of State. Listen to the Dalit advocacy groups and lawyers to understand how discrimination, again, on the basis of caste, is becoming more and more important part of the U.S. Society. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about my organization, the International Commission for Dalit Rights, that we've done a number of things over the years. You'll see a picture here of us with Washington, D.C. Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton at a conference that we sponsored. We do research, particularly trying to get a better understanding of caste. There's sponsoring through the American Statistical Association with the Caste Freedom Index, a way of understanding how caste discrimination is reducing over time, we hope. Education and all types of activities, supporting journalists, Dalit journalists, supporting for lawyers advocating for human rights in South Asia, helping to monitor elections, and as a way of sort of making money for the organization, providing low-cost immigration assistance and support. We responded also to the earthquake in Nepal, and we brought together Dalit activists across the U.S. and Canada. So I've gone a bit over time, but I did want to address all of these issues because I find them absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much. Any comments or questions? I'll take the mic around.
Just could you say a little bit more about Gandhi's position on caste?
Yeah, Gandhi wanted the caste system to be dealt with within the Hindu religion, and he particularly wanted the Hindu religion to be a national religion within India, but he also wanted it to be a secular country. So he was recognized that the caste system would not end immediately, and that it would end over time. And Ambedkar, on the other hand, wanted the government to be more forceful and to be more decisive. And so that's why there was such conflict between the two.
Thank you, Rick. I have two questions, actually. If I understand there are about 160 million Dalits in India at the current time, at least that's what it says on my phone. If I were to go there, how would I know that someone's a Dalit? Is it their name, the way they look, what it says on their legal document, what? How do you know?
It's mainly known by their family name. And some people try to change it, but they're kind of ashamed of their family names. I was at a session where African Americans of what they call legacy families of very important African Americans met with Dalits from South Asia and the U.S. And the legacy families were very proud of their names, like Booker T. Washington's descendants and Sally Hemings' descendants, but the Dalits were ashamed of their names, and it was very interesting to see that. But you can recognize them by their names at least, and then of course their occupations, particularly in the rural areas. Yeah.
I don't quite understand about discrimination against Dalits in this country unless it's amongst the Indian American population, because, if I met someone from India, I would have no clue as to anything about their caste heritage. And of course, the last names would mean nothing to me or to most Americans.
Yeah, you're right. It's among the South Asian community, and particularly we see it in areas where the South Asians are employed, and that's like in the tech industry. And so it's very hard for those who are not from South Asia to understand what's going on. And that was one reason that we were educating the U.S. government agencies on how to deal with it.
Does the ACLU take Dalits' rights under their umbrella somewhere? Do they address it?
Their human rights organizations have addressed caste discrimination. The ACLU is a human rights organization. I can't tell you whether they have a specific written out policy for it, but I think that the ACLU is particularly interested in expanding the realm of human rights. And yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. I don't know if they've been involved in lawsuits.
My question is related very much to what Paul was saying, in that it's inconceivable for me to imagine a specific discrimination against a Dalit in the United States. So as you explained, this is mostly among Southeast Asians who understood their names and so on. But I was also wondering that in the job sector, where Indians and other Indians, Southeast Asians have been extremely, how should I say, sought after because of their understanding of the tech sector. So if you're a Dalit and a Dalit name, would they still not hire you because even though you are, a top tech person, will they still not hire you because of that?
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize that because of the affirmative action in India, that many Dalits end up being quite well educated. And then the question often is, should they be asked their caste when they are seeking employment in the U.S.? And that's a no-no, but it is being done. And there are issues about promotion and discipline. And so it's hard to prove that caste is an issue, but that's what's going to court. So, any other comments or questions? Yes.
Thanks, Rick. That was really interesting. My question is, what is the percentage of Dalits in India today?
It's about 16%. So one out of six. And as I said, in other countries like, in South America, Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, it's a much larger percentage of the population. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This has been useful for me to be able to share what I know on Caste, and appreciate you participating. Thank you. There's a question from online. I can't read it. Can changing names help? Or can folks identify Dalits by appearance in the U.S.? There is no, some people do change their names, but Dalits are not necessarily recognized by appearance. There's a whole range of South Asians that vary in terms of their color and ethnicity. And so really, it's quite difficult to recognize a Dalit by appearance. Name is certainly an issue, and often people ask, what their caste is, and the Dalits are sort of ashamed to announce themselves. So thank you, everybody.